Don't worry, friends, you're not having a stroke. That horrible noise you're hearing is an actual bugle because the cavalry is coming. Oh yes, it's official. The countries of the world have pledged to end climate change, and the country leading the charge is...
Not a lot.
Saudi Arabia! Wow, I did not see that coming. Saudi Arabia, the country that owns the largest oil company in the world, has pledged to bring down their fossil fuel emissions. And you don't have to take my word for it.
In 2021, Saudi Arabia committed to taking action.
We will set and surpass new goals for how to protect the environment and our future.
As the world grapples with the climate change and the urgent need for eco-friendly solutions, Saudi Arabia has emerged as a visionary nation. A desert-covered nation, once known for its oil reserves, is leading the way towards a greener future, from wind farms to solar plants.
And sure, Saudi Arabia got a ton of good PR for their promises, including an exclusive week-long climate conference ahead of the annual UN Climate Summit, but they're not doing it for the admiration. They're doing it because they believe the science, and they know we can't keep burning oil and gas without causing more climate change. So it was really weird when they got caught on camera detailing a hidden plan to get countries in Africa and Southeast Asia addicted to oil so they can turn around and sell them, you guessed it, fossil fuels.
The issues of climate change and the energy transition, the kingdom's kind of spotted there's a risk of declining oil demand around the world, and so the OSP has been set up to try and kind of, I guess, artificially stimulate demand in some key markets. Is that what you guys have been set up to do?
Yes, it is one of the main objectives that we are trying to accomplish.
That's right. The Saudis have a plan that literally translates to the Oil Demand Sustainability Program, and god damn if it doesn't conflict with pert near every one of the UN climate goals. Undercover journalists posing as oil investors contacted officials from the Saudi government and were treated to a very detailed plot to establish oil and gas infrastructure to artificially generate a spike in oil sales rather than allowing fossil fuel demand to tail off due to new renewable technology and our global climate goals. These are the same journalists who did that sting operation on an ExxonMobil lobbyist and got him to speed confess to a whole bunch of Exxon's nefarious plans.
Did we aggressively fight against some of the science? Yes. Did we join some of these shadow groups to work against some of the early efforts? Yes, that's true.
A carbon tax isn't going to happen, but it gives us a talking point that we can say, well, what is ExxonMobil for? Well, we're for a carbon tax.
Ooh, you did a great job on that sting operation, boys. Ooh, it was good. No notes. It was so good that I actually did a video on it back in 2021, linked in the bio. You can watch it if you like. And when I saw the footage of Saudi Arabia using their climate pledge as a smokescreen to sell more oil, I figured you might want to see that too. Hi, I'm Rollie Williams, a guy with a climate science and policy degree and an extremely limited wardrobe. And this is a video about Saudi Arabia's secret plan to sabotage climate goals. Welcome to Climate Town. Now, you might know Saudi Arabia as that country that recently impulse bought an entire professional golf league. Or possibly as the country that allegedly deported 3 dudes in 2013 for being too handsome. But Saudi Arabia's real claim to fame is being the LeBron James of oil.
Puts him down on the face!
Now, when we normally talk about big oil, we're talking about those massive multinational corporations you know and love. Your Shells, your Chevrons, your Exxons, you know, real cool guys.
Did we aggressively fight against some of the science? Yes.
They're out on the streets every day lobbying against climate policy or underreporting how much methane they're leaking into the atmosphere or just generally obstructing any progress on that thing all their websites say they believe in. Well, it turns out those 7 companies account for 13% of global oil production. And don't get me wrong, 13% is a fucking ton of oil. But over 50% of global oil comes from companies that are straight up government owned. They're called national oil companies. And let me tell you, it's a lot easier to lobby your government when you are the government. A lot of countries have nationalized oil companies, but the absolute Mac father of all of them, hang on, I have a bit for this. Weighing in at 10 million barrels of oil per day, making more in profit last year than Chevron, Exxon, Shell, and BP combined, all the way from Saudi Arabia. It's Saudi Arabia! All the way from Saudi Arabia really gives this one away.
Yeah.
Do we cut this? I mean, I feel like it's so much setup for this one little thing that we just did one time in the parking lot video.
Yeah, we're probably not going to use it.
Really, it's Saudi Arabia's national oil company, Saudi Aramco, but again, that's Saudi Arabia's government-owned oil company, so it's kind of same. And while most oil companies are panicking about finding their next big oil score, the Saudis are sitting on top of boatloads of proven oil reserves just waiting to be sucked out of the ground, refined, and then slopped into the tank of a Ford F-150 truck that statistically will never be used to tow or haul anything. That's not strictly relevant, I just think it's interesting. Anyway, Saudi Arabia simply has so much oil, and they would like to sell it, please, for money. Lots of money. Buying a professional soccer team money. Or buying 10% of Heathrow Airport money. How is that for sale? But at the same time, they're a country that wants to be taken seriously on the global stage. They've signed the Paris Climate Agreement, and they've explicitly endorsed the UN's climate goals.
Plans must highlight efforts to change business models and internal operations to phase out fossil fuels.
A massive, expedited move forward on decarbonization.
Investing in new fossil fuel infrastructure is moral and economic madness.
Unfortunately, it just so happens that these goals are a teensy bit completely incompatible with Saudi Arabia's other goals of making sure every molecule of hydrocarbon will come out. And that's not me being a drama queen, that's a direct quote from the Saudi Minister of Energy. And while demand for oil might soon be dropping off in most of the world, journalists from the Center for Climate Reporting discovered Saudi Arabia has a 46-point plan to ensure that they don't have to stop selling oil even a little bit. And this is not like a few guys in a room kicking around a new slogan for marketing oil. This is a sweeping national program spanning 17 government entities. The Saudi government even went so far as to hire a graphic designer to make this beautiful presentation, laying out the entire plan in easy to follow steps. A very helpful intro slide shows that they've identified more than 80 ways to stimulate oil demand, but they're prioritizing 46 objectives based primarily on which one is gonna get that oil moving the fastest, which is a little tough to square with this.
Science is clear. We need to phase out fossil fuels.
The addiction to fossil fuels. Fossil fuels.
You fools.
I'd love to talk about all 46 plans, but I promised my producers I would start making videos that weren't 30 minutes long. So here are my top 3 favorite schemes. Automobiles, or cars, guzzle down more delicious sweet oil than anything else on the planet. Mostly because there are so many of them. Unfortunately, gas-powered cars are getting canceled by woke electric vehicles on the liberal free market. So Saudi Arabian oil demand is gonna have to take a hit. Unless they can concoct some kind of plan to get African and Asian households to buy new cars and make sure those new cars are gas-powered. Luckily, the Oil Demand Sustainability Plan has got them covered. First, you gotta make roads by facilitating investments in road infrastructure with a special emphasis on highways. If that sounds familiar to you, it's because it's exactly what the United States did in the 1950s and 60s. In America, it was car companies pushing for the roads. In sub-Saharan Africa, it'll be a foreign government with a vested interest in selling oil. Radical. Now, if you're actually interested in moving people around and you're not trying to make them buy oil, you might go with a more cost-effective solution like public transportation, trains, streetcars, you know, the kind of technology that we already have and that actively moves millions of people every day without accelerating the exact climate crisis that you've committed to stopping. But maybe I'm being too cynical. You know, maybe this actually is about transportation, and it's not just about getting low-income countries to adopt internal combustion engine technology.
In case of roads, we aim to accelerate and enhance the impact and adoption of internal combustion engine technological optimization.
Awesome. But roads don't mean Jack Johnson without cars. While over 90% of households in the US have at least one car, and in some cases, hundreds of cars.
They were very inexpensive.
Car ownership in Africa is way lower. Africa is 17% of the globe's population and just 1% of car sales. And the Saudis have a plan to turn that one into one of the many available larger numbers. I've always thought 8 is a pretty good looking number. Ooh, a smooth, continuous 8. And you don't want people to accidentally buy a bunch of electric cars, so the Saudi plan is to find a major car manufacturer and make a deal with them to produce a bunch of cheap gas-powered cars through science and fair policies. This will, of course, not lead to a decrease in emissions that the United Nations agreed to, but it will have an oil uplift for the kingdom. In my entire life, I've never heard the term oil uplift, but here we are. Oil demand sustainability, baby. Now, just for the record, it's a genuinely good thing to want to improve the lives of people in Africa, and access to transportation is a good way to do that, but this is clearly about finding new people to sell oil to, and you can tell because they wrote it in the slideshow. Which brings me to scheme number 2. Now, a car's gas tank holds tens of gallons, and that's fine, but why not dream bigger? And when it comes to the absolute craziest, criminally inefficient, most fuel-intensive activity you can possibly think of, look no further than supersonic passenger jets. Right in the ear. Right in the ear. Oh, then supersonic passenger jets. If you're unfamiliar with supersonic passenger jets, it's probably because there aren't any around nowadays. The most famous one stopped flying in 2003, in part because it was so inefficient to use. Sure, they could cut a few hours off of long flights, but round-trip tickets were around $20,000 in today money. They were so stupidly loud you couldn't fly them over land because they would literally break people's windows, and you know what? I'm just gonna let these nice British people tell you about them.
Concorde's smoky engines were a concern. It was hemorrhaging money. Even more worrying was the noise created when she flew faster than the speed of sound.
When a supersonic aircraft flies over a town, a suburb, or a city, the complaints that poured in were legion.
And, you know, there was no space. I'm searching to avoid the word cramped, but it was cramped.
Well, it's always exciting flying supersonic, and it's always exciting to get to New York before you've left.
Even Sting is having a hard time making it look comfortable. Sting! Sting!
How many people watch this video you think even know who Sting is?
But what got Saudi Arabia really excited about supersonic jet travel was that it uses 3 times more fuel per seat than normal commercial flights. It's the first thing on the slide about developing the supersonic jet market. And just so we're clear, there are 0 supersonic passenger jets currently operating. Saudi Arabia wants to resurrect the market, apparently on the basis that it uses oil inefficiently. And just as a side note, I was trying to look up where they got their market predictions, and the first hit was a company called Mordor Intelligence, which was very convenient for me because I forgot to drop in more Lord of the Rings references to make that first one a little more motivated, and this one really fell into my lap.
Build me an army worthy of Mordor.
But maybe these climate promises are more of an aspiration than an actual promise.
In 2021, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia made a promise to the world.
Well, okay, maybe there's like a translation thing going on here. Maybe a promise is more of a, like, we'll do our best kind of thing.
My father told me that a promise is the strongest thing anyone can make.
Okay, no, that's what promise does mean. Do we have like a Lord of the Rings thing?
I made a promise, Mr. Frodo. A promise.
And that brings me to the last and cartoon villainiest scheme, scheme number 3. Here in the United States, we take constant access to electricity for granted. Like right now, all this shit's plugged in and I don't have a backup plan. Don't need one. and I don't even really appreciate it enough. But the part of Africa located below the Sahara is really hurting for power. More than 500 million people don't have it, and that's not really expected to improve through 2030. Ideally, someone would build a power grid around renewables with integrated battery storage so they could leapfrog the problems with fossil fuel-based grids, and the UN is completely on board. So naturally, Saudi Arabia's plan is to use the dirtiest, most polluting fuel source they have to run mobile power stations on barges that can be moved around based on who can pay the most for energy access. And I'm not saying dirtiest fuel source because I'm mad at fossil fuels in general. I'm referring specifically to heavy fuel oil, which is basically a toxic sludge-like byproduct of the oil refining process. In the 1960s, oil refiners discovered that this petroleum waste product could actually be burned. So instead of disposing of it responsibly, they started selling it for cheap to power heavy machinery. And there's one other thing about heavy fuel oil, and you'll never guess what it is. It pollutes like a motherfucker. It's responsible for a huge chunk of sulfur dioxide emissions, it causes a litany of health problems, and it's effectively banned in many jurisdictions. Ships that use heavy fuel oil often have to have a second fuel source to power their engine as they're passing through environmentally conscious jurisdictions before they can switch over to the heavy fuel oil. Or at least they did, until the problem got so bad that the International Maritime Organization announced new regulations on sulfur emissions, which severely restricted heavy fuel oil use even in famously lawless international waters. It's so dirty and caused so many health problems that many countries started restricting the use of heavy fuel oil in electricity generation, including Saudi Arabia. So at a time when the world is swearing up and down to get to net zero emissions and pivot to renewable energy, and the market for heavy fuel oil is rapidly declining, Saudi Arabia's plan is to burn as much of it as possible directly off the coast of the countries who are at the highest risk of climate change and pollution-induced health problems. God damn!
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys!
And again, there are 46 different schemes in the slide deck. We didn't even talk about propping up gas-powered rideshare services to reinforce car infrastructure, or lobbying against electric vehicle subsidies, or the plan to ensure Saudi officials are part of the regulatory conferences, which could lead to further delays on oil restrictions. And look, I get it. Your main resource is oil. Of course you're gonna wanna sell it. But don't sabotage every other country on Earth just because you don't want to change. And definitely don't pretend to be part of the solution just so you can be a bigger part of the problem. That's a dick move. And just for the record, Saudi Arabia is not the only country saying one thing and doing the opposite. In 2015, almost 200 countries signed the Paris Climate Agreement, pledging to steadily cut their emissions. And yet both global emissions and fossil fuel use have gone up. The most recent Conference of Parties, COP28, was hosted by the United Arab Emirates, and they had the CEO of their national oil company named as the president of COP. And the same guys that exposed the Saudi oil plan also uncovered a fucking ton of plans for that oil CEO to use COP28 to meet with other countries to sell more oil. And it's not just the petrostates. The US pledged to cut emissions in half by 2030 and then greenlit a wave of new oil and gas infrastructure. China promised to hit emissions targets, and now they've used so much coal they're responsible for a third of global greenhouse gases. They're building the equivalent of 2 new coal plants every week. Basically, every country is coming up short, and the more we let rampant propaganda go unchecked, the less likely anyone is to actually keep their promises. It's tempting to look to our respective governments to make the right decisions, but it turns out they're just looking to us to see if we're noticing. So I've got good news and bad news. The bad news is the cavalry's not coming to save us. The good news is, congratulations, because you are now the cavalry. And in this case, the cavalry's job is to not buy into the bullshit and delay tactics that we are constantly seeing. Now, I would never advocate for any kind of actual bugling, but sounding the metaphorical alarm when you see your government promise one thing and then do the opposite sounds pretty appropriate to me. That means staying informed and remembering which pledges your government made, and then knocking down their door asking where the f those emission cuts are. If you're looking for a place to get started and you're here in the US, check out this playbook from our friends over at Climate Changemakers. They've got a bunch of step-by-step guides, including one that takes you through exactly how to advocate for climate pollution reduction grants in your state or local area. Or maybe you have a different action you want to take. Maybe you want to join a local climate organization. Or maybe you want to pressure major newspapers to stop taking ad money from fossil fuel corporations. Or maybe, I don't know, you got access to a lot of bees or something, like 40,000 bees, and maybe you could train them to smell fossil methane. I don't know, whatever your situation, find a way to get involved. Because to stick the landing on this deeply underbaked Lord of the Rings bit, even the smallest person can change the course of the future. And if you're looking for a place to start getting educated, I can highly recommend The Colorado Problem, an entire documentary about just how insane it is to have built so much water-intensive infrastructure in the American West, and how everything is gonna go really great, but great in the way that the Great Depression was great. It's available right now on Nebula, a streaming service with a deep bench of high-quality videos from heavy hitters like Philosophy Tube, Simon Clark, that guy's got some top-tier climate content. It's got H Bomber Guy dropping 4-hour masterpieces, and they're all on Nebula, cooking up funky dishes without the burden of trying to appease an algorithm. And one other thing, I'm on Nebula with early ad-free releases of Climate Town episodes, just like this one. And there's even a little Nebula Plus video of me editing this exact video right now when I was 9 cups of coffee deep into an editing fever dream. The bottom line here is that if you sign up with the link in the description, you get exclusive originals and unfiltered Nebula content for just $2.50 a month. How is that possible? And if you really want to get nuts with it, I mean nuts, Nebula is offering a special lifetime membership. For a cool $300, you get Nebula until the universe dies. So if you want to support an independent streaming service that helps give creators the freedom to make the content we actually want to make, including access to exclusive and thoughtful videos, head on over to nebula.tv/climatetown and sign up for just $2.50 a month. What a deal. And that's the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you have it in you, drop a little subscribe. For some reason, seeing that number go up makes me feel incredible, and I'm just trying to chase that dragon. You could also like the video. You could also copy the URL and print it out. I can't stop you. I can't stop you from doing basically anything. If you really like the video and you don't have a printer to do that last thing, head on over to our Patreon page where for like $5 a month, you get access to deleted scenes, discounted tickets to our live show, cut footage, all the stuff that wasn't quite good enough to be free right here on YouTube. We also have a podcast called The Climate Deniers Playbook. It's got me and my good friend and daily show writer, Nicole Conlan. It's great, she's great, I'm there too. We also have a newsletter that's kind of like the text-based version of this episode where we put all the extra stuff we couldn't cram into this and we send it to whatever email you give us. And also we have a Discord server where you can get on there with all the other Climate Townies. We don't have a word for that. You know what? In the comments, leave me a comment of what you think the word for that should be, and I will look at it. All right, thank you so much. I'll see you next time. Bye.
I have not tried marijuana. I have never used it at any time.
Alright, there's all